Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Thina. I will be hosting the webinar that we are currently participating in today, which actually looks at the impact of load shedding on local government, particularly services and the municipal infrastructure, including their finances. Now, we know that we have been affected by load shedding for the past 5 years, but it has actually gotten worse in the past 24 months, leading up to load shedding being institutionalized into stage 6. But now we understand that beyond the current stage 6 that we have experienced is that Eskom has announced that it will be implementing stages 2 to 4 in the next 2 years. So while there are ongoing debates about what this should mean to the economy and the kind of risks it creates for us as citizens, little attention is really given to understanding the medium and long-term effects of what this will have on the viability of local government finances and budgets that are actually needed to provide services to communities. But as we know, when it comes to municipalities, their revenue generation is highly dependent on the sales of electricity. And we know that municipalities sell the electricity and they get profit margins of about 15 to 25% by purchasing from Eskom. But now the threat is that these revenues are starting to diminish because of the reduction of electricity demand and the sales that they should be making. But what also puts another difficulty in this situation is that recently we also heard that NERSA, which is the National Energy Regulator of South Africa, granted Eskom 18% of the tariff hikes in the next coming year, which will be augmented by another 12% in an increase by 2024. And this has really drawn a lot of public outcry from communities and civil society in terms of understanding what kind of devastating effects this will have on households who are essentially expected to pay more for services when it comes to electricity that they will not be getting adequate to the amount that they are paying for. But at the same time, we know that municipalities are trapped in a cycle where municipalities are owed electricity by communities who are not paying. And at the same time, they themselves are owing Eskom close to 50 billion rand. And Eskom is also being owed by other communities who are directly getting their electricity from. So we can see that there's a lot of dire effects that this will have on the municipal institutions of local government and particularly communities. But now we understand that Eskom is starting to drive, for a different form of providing electricity. And also there's a public outcry to say that why don't we look at alternative sources such as independent power producers, which can be decentralized for municipalities to outsource their energy generation. And we know that the city of Cape Town has been positioning itself as an exemplary mode of how this can be done. So in this conversation, what we would like to get is to understand exactly what the local government sector is planning to do to circumvent these dire effects that we are experiencing due to load shedding, and also understand what kind of implications these will have on services, because we even know that when electricity is cut, water supply also becomes a major problem because water pumps, they depend on electricity to pump water into our households. So, ladies and gentlemen, today we'll be joined by various members of the panel who are coming from SALGA, the National Treasury, and the Public Affairs Research Institute. And first on our panel will be Dr. Silas Mulaudzi, who's a renewable energy specialist at SALGA, and he actually holds a PhD in renewable energy. He has been focusing on what kind of alternatives will the local government sector look at in order to circumvent this crisis. Dr. Silas, let me hand over to you so that you can take us through your presentation for the next coming 10 to 15 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Program Director, for an opportunity. Yes, as introduced, my name is Silas Mulaudzi. I work for SALGA, South African Local Government Association. It is indeed a great pleasure for us to participate as SALGA in this particular platform, and obviously to share some of the highlights around the impact of load shedding on the municipal services, infrastructure, as well as finances. So I'm going to take you through in the next 10 minutes some of the critical points around introduction, the impact of load shedding on the municipal services, on the finance of municipalities. And you did program recommendation about the debts that municipalities are owing to Eskom, as well as the debts that consumers or customers are owing to municipalities. I will also touch on the network infrastructure, which is actually suffering a lot as a result of load shedding, and ultimately some of the conclusion in terms of what is it that the local government is planning to do in order to adjust, or in order to prevent the load shedding, since it's having a severe negative impact in the municipalities as well as our local government at large. We all know, Chairperson, that energy is the lifeblood of economy. Therefore, every development also is being to energy. Hence, energy is the crux of economic development and economic growth everywhere, not only South Africa, but across the globe. And one of the biggest barrier or constraint to the economic growth and development in South Africa, especially with the experience of 2022 load shedding, has been the load shedding itself. It's one of the single biggest constraints. We have seen this many times where it has been indicated that this load shedding or power cuts is costing a lot. It's costing country around 1 billion rand, which is a lot. Hence, load shedding is having severe impact in the country at large. And we have seen that government is taking actions both to address the crisis and, of course, taking every effort to ensure that load shedding becomes a thing of the past. We've seen this a lot. We have lately seen the 6-month publication from Energy Action Plan, or for Energy Action Plan rather, that outlines key interventions on what is going to be done, or what the country is planning to do in order to ensure that we cap the effects of load shedding. We prevent load shedding from occurring and recurring over time. Chairperson, allow me to pass this slide, because this is information that is available in the what we call the Action Energy Plan that has been published last month, and colleagues can get lots more in terms of unpacking what fixing and improving the availability of existing supply will be done at Eskom, and many other things. But I'm going to pass this slide and go straight to the impact of load shedding in the municipal services. Well, there has been what we call vandalism of infrastructure, theft of infrastructure, Chairperson, such as the cables before load shedding. Hence, during load shedding, we have seen that it has just been worse. It's just out of control. Municipalities are bleeding with the theft of the vandalism of infrastructure. We have seen the transformers, a substation being vandalized during load shedding, because that's an opportunity where criminal activities happen, especially in dark. We have also seen that there is a damage to the electricity distribution network, especially the mini-sub, the substation, due to this excessive switching on and off during load shedding. As you know, that these are infrastructures that are not designed for frequent on and off. Hence, it has become a problem, and this is costing municipalities a lot of money, Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen. Again, in terms of wastewater treatment supply, there has been negative impact. You have alluded to this particular point in your introductory remarks, Program Director. Indeed, you are right, absolutely correct. The load shedding is having severe impact in the wastewater treatment works, issues around water pumps, reservoirs, sewer pumps, and all those kind of things. Many municipalities are actually planning to buy generator, which is one genset, which is one of the things that I will talk about in the next few slides. But yes, there is inability to pump and supply water to the citizen as a result of the load shedding that occurs every now and then, especially when we come to higher load stages. Then continue on the impact of load shedding on the municipal services. There is a plan to use genset, as I said, for these wastewater treatment works. However, we all know what it's going to cost in terms of fuel, diesel for the generators, as and when there is load shedding in an area where the wastewater treatment plant is located. So it's another financial implication to the municipality. And the question is, where will the money come from? Negative impact on the economic activities. You would have noticed that businesses, it's no longer easy these days to sell South Africa to business, especially foreign investors, due to the fact that there is no reliable power supply in the country. And you know that electricity is one of the key parameters or consideration for doing business in any country. Therefore, some of the firms are closing down, and we see the job losses. And then we'll come to the impact of job losses. What happens to the municipal finance when there is a job losses as a result of load shedding, when business either close down or move abroad? So let's look at the municipal finances. What happens? Number one, there is loss of sales revenue. And this is a key factor because as and when there's load shedding, it's obvious municipalities are not selling electricity because of load shedding. Looking at cities, some of the cities are really incurring a loss of income due to unserved energy during the load shedding. It can, of course, vary from one municipality to another. However, an average of around 3 to 6 million per stage load shedding per day. This is the loss that municipalities are incurring as we speak today. And hence, you will know that this is having severe impact in the municipal finances. Again, in terms of the overtime budget, you will know that every financial year, municipalities does the budget for overtime because there will be electricians and many other employees that will work overtime. Then we see that now the budget has gone abnormally high in a way that municipalities do not have that particular money, but it has to be done. The switching operators as well as the control officers, as you know, they have to perform the network switching operations. And of course, they need to restore supply after equipment damage or either theft or vandalism incident. And this is costing a lot. For metros, it ranges from 60,000 to 80,000 per day of load shedding. So these are costs that municipalities are incurring. And you will know we're talking about per day on this particular cost. These are metros. Then if you look at secondary and smaller licensed municipal distributors, they don't even have this money in case. And of course, you wouldn't tell electrician that wait for tomorrow, then you will work on the restoration of electricity supply. Customers such as me and you, Chairperson, we need electricity to be restored almost immediately whenever there is a power cut. Hence, whether it's after hours or not, it doesn't really matter to us as customers. We need restoration. Therefore, there is abnormally high cost for the overtime. The municipal customers actually, well, some of them losing jobs and hence they are unable to pay the rates. Some of them are, unable to pay the rates due to, because of the no or low economic activities locally, which is caused by closing down of businesses. And as you alluded earlier, that as long as there is load shedding, chances are that there will be job losses. And when there is job losses, customers won't be able to pay the municipal rates, including electricity. And what happens is exactly what you alluded in the beginning, Chairperson, that the customers won't be able to pay the municipalities. As we're sitting here, municipalities are owed around 290 billion rand for services, specifically for electricity. 37 billion are basically owed by customers, and these customers range from organ of state, commercial households, as well as others. So these are the debts that municipalities are owed, and of course, municipalities owe 56 billion to Eskom as we speak, or as of December 2022. So load shedding is really contributing to this particular picture due to number of job losses. Hence, customers ended up not be able to pay municipal bills and rates, including electricity bills. And of course, the potential for increase in the indigent as some are losing jobs. What you then at the end of the day will have is a lot of indigent in the municipal areas, and there won't be much revenue to be generated by the municipality. Some customers, of course, what we've noticed in the past few months or years rather, is that especially the medium and high income households. They are basically installing embedded generation in the form of solar PV rooftop. And what will happen is that, of course, they will consume the power that they're generating and ended up consuming less from the municipality, which means the electricity bill will almost be halved. Hence, that's a loss to the municipalities. More funds will be needed to run the genset, as I said, for wastewater treatment works during the load shedding. As you know, what happens to the wastewater treatment when there's no power. Businesses are closing down, some moving abroad. Additional costs for as and when are required. Contractors to assist with the repair of some of this equipment that are failing during the load shedding. And what we see is that in some of the metros, approximately 180,000 per day that they're incurring for the either employees in a form of overtime or of service provider or contractors that will be requested to go and repair as well as restore electricity at any given point in time. And then additional cost on private security, basically to assist in preventing theft and implementation of the early warning detection of cable theft. In some cases, especially now during the load shedding, private security is overwhelmed. And in some cases, this mechanism is really struggling to curb the theft and vandalism as is. And on its own is an additional cost to the municipality. So there is this particular challenge that municipalities are having, which is caused by load shedding. Looking at the impact of load shedding on the network infrastructure, there is a lot of equipment failure, which is increasing when load shedding is applied over a prolonged period, especially in higher load stages. As you know that this network, chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, are not designed for frequent on and off. Hence, they are failing, and then it mainly affects the oil field equipment and where there is a risk of breakdown of equipment, which increases each time when it gets on and off. So cable faults, again, we see lots of cable faults that is increasing due to high loads after restoring supply of the electricity. And there's cost involved in this reparation of the cable faults, Chairperson. Varies, as I indicated the figure in the slides. Some municipalities are incurring a minimum of 150,000. Some they go to as high as 250,000 per day of load shedding. Similarly, the medium voltage switch gear are also failing with this frequent switching, which municipalities are also incurring a range of 50,000 to 150,000 per day. This is actually the financial implication during load shedding, Chairperson and ladies and gentlemen, is quite high in the municipality. As I said earlier, think about the smaller municipalities that is struggling to generate revenue, where many of the customers are actually indigent. So surely they will struggle to incur this kind of cost. So now, in conclusion, Chairperson, what is happening is that, or what we are seeing is that this cost that I've just highlighted some of them, as well as the loss to municipalities due to load shedding is absolutely substantially high, and obviously it's unsustainable, because the question is, for how long will municipalities be able to incur such cost? Will municipalities be able to absorb the loss? And it's unaffordable, as I said, with the secondary and smaller municipalities, and obviously with metros. Many of the metros, they are struggling to afford this. You will know some of them are also owing Eskom billions of rents. So question is sustainability. For how long will the municipalities hold on with this load shedding, with the cost that is supposed to incur every day? We are saying that there must be support to be provided by the national government to municipalities to conduct a study, because we need to quantify. Of course, I gave you some of the figures, but of course, that is for 1 or 2 or 3 metros. There is a need to conduct a study to quantify the impact of load shedding, to deal with externalities of this particular load shedding. We need to look at the loss of revenue, the damage to infrastructure, theft and vandalism, and many more others. So that, we're advocating a SALGA for the funds for the support from national government to make funds available for this particular exercise, which is important. And development of own generation capacity through procurement of electricity from independent power producers. Many municipalities are looking at this as I speak, and we look forward to the procurement of generation capacity. You will have seen some of the metros have already started, and many more secondary municipalities, secondary cities rather, are looking at procurement of new generation capacity. The second to last slide, Chairperson, in a minute. The implementation of measures to enable rooftop solar PV. This is what you've seen. City of Cape Town they did what announced in the past few weeks, and the support to municipalities to enter into PPP. This is what we're also advocating for. And of course, the installation of solar rooftop PV is the last slide. Thank you very much, Chairperson. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mulaudzi, for that concise presentation. Actually, you really picked up on a lot of issues that have been going through our thoughts about what kind of implications this will have on local government. And it's quite startling when you give us a figure of 3 to 6 billion rand that is being lost in municipalities in each stage of load shedding, and what kind of, ramification it also has, particularly to households and the local economies, not to even mention the informal economies, which are so dependent on energy. But on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to emphasize that if you've got any questions and answers, please post them on the Q&A. And we also have a chat box as well for those who want to make some comments. We will be taking those questions after the presentation. So moving forward, we will have our next presenter, which is Mr. Sadesh Ramjathan. He is responsible for the intergovernmental relations, local government budgeting at the National Treasury. And here, I think, Sadesh, you will have to really, take into consideration that, the revenue allocation when it comes to local government has always been sufficient, although last year it increased from 10% to 14%, but it has always been inconsiderate of municipalities, which are smaller municipalities, rural municipalities that are grant dependent and absolutely have no capabilities of raising revenue. And what it's even, perturbing is that some of these municipalities actually owe Eskom a lot of money. For example, like Mulaudzi. You also have municipalities that are under administration, like Imfuleni municipality that had its assets attached by Eskom more than a week ago. And those assets are assets that have to provide services such as waste management. So, it is these ripple effects that we are starting to see, and we need to understand if whether really municipalities will have the necessary budgets to offer these services, taking into account that their operational and expenditure budgets are escalating over the roof. So without wasting any time, let me hand over to you, Sadesh, to take us through your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Program Director. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks, Dr. Silas, for that informative overview of the load shedding impact on municipalities. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to start my message with a quote by Albert Einstein. I quote, "In the midst of every crisis lies great opportunity," unquote. Now, the question is load shedding affecting municipal finances? And you perhaps know better than I do, it absolutely. In some cases, it is more devastating than others. And the areas that I'm going to describe now has been the observation from our engagements with municipalities, as well as the analysis of the municipal finances. Now, this is a multifaceted challenge. On the positive side, it is driving South Africans towards energy efficiency and an overall more environmentally friendly green economy. If South Africans could survive load shedding, we could find ourselves with a much more competitive economy that is based closer on first world alternative energy generation. If this could be provided from within the local economy, it could spur overall economic development for many municipalities. In parallel, it could leave South Africans with a much changed need for municipal services, or even a completely different perspective of local government service delivery model. Now, municipalities on average, historically, could earn a margin between 15 to 25%, as the program director initially mentioned. And the profit margins are now very down. They've reduced drastically. Once lost, this revenue cannot be recovered, and revenue foregone is permanent with a long-lasting effect on the sustainability of local government. There's also instances where the load shedding is disrupting services, and Dr. Silas touched on this as well. Municipalities having less electricity available for their own operational use and provide the municipal services that's needed. It is evident that in the current circumstances, as an example, traffic control is a crisis. And the more important one that Dr. Silas also touched on is the water crisis. Pumps and water pipes are being affected. Pumps required to pump water into reservoirs are affected through these load shedding schedules. Water infrastructure such as pipes and meters are reported to be damaged and has resulted in airlocked infrastructure. This directly affects the local sphere ability to provide reliable services such as health facilities, clinics, libraries, and even license renewal facilities. And we'll come back to this point later. Now, load shedding also leads to safety challenges, and within the municipalities, again, vandalism of municipal infrastructure. It is much easier to steal copper pipes, cables, transformers, and even strip municipal resources of the desired resources that's required to provide reliable services. This has the potential to spark an increase in community protests and civil unrest, which again can lead to damage infrastructure even more. Now, the lifespan of electricity infrastructure is shortened. And again, Dr. Silas touched on this. Transformers and switchgears are not designed to be switched off and on repeatedly, and leads to an increased need for repairs and maintenance. As noted earlier, prolonged load shedding eats into the vital revenue sources that municipalities don't have much of. This means overall fewer municipalities' finances are available to maintain income generating assets that also underpin local economic development. If a municipality is unable to meet the demand for increased repairs and maintenance, it is likely to experience additional power shortages on top of the load shedding, and this will lead to further failure in infrastructure. It is reported that after just a few hours of load shedding, that municipalities are at risk of exceeding their notified maximum demand when switched back on due to the sudden surge of energy. This means that municipalities exceeding the notified maximum demands will be penalized through hefty penalties and fines from Eskom. Continued load shedding will lead to a change in the electricity tariff structure of municipalities. Up to now, tariffs are driven by consumer usage, but municipalities will need to change the tariffs to at least recover the fixed charges to operate. This means basic charges or fixed charges will become the main source of revenue and not the units sold, as was in the case up to date. The extent of such change in tariffs could become unaffordable to consumers. Many municipalities that cannot afford to switch to alternative energy for their own use lose revenue since their call centers are not operational, the cashiers are ineffective, are closed during some load shedding periods, and this could mean that municipalities are not in a position to receive any funds that consumers are willing to pay. And this ultimately affects the cash flow of a municipality. In some municipalities, are mitigating the load shedding challenge by buying generators to provide their own electricity during load shedding. These municipalities are faced with diesel costs that are equally draining their coffers. So they are faced with a double-edged sword in this instance. At another level, industries, businesses, and households cannot afford to access alternative energy sources. Many will have to scale down sales and operations that directly, in turn, will affect economic viability of many local economies, and on these customers' ability to pay for even the little property tax and services that they were in a position to do so. Furthermore, in the face of a substandard and limited availability of municipal services, the perception of municipal money waste increases, and we may even see a bigger and progressively further deterioration of current paying customers. The final depression due to customers migrating to alternative energy will be dire, as electricity costs will remain, and while the electricity sales will reduce. Considering that the rising repo and related interest hikes, coupled with the high petroleum prices, and the knock-on effect is probably to include an even faster declining national and local economies, together with a sharp rise in the demand for government's free basic services. The National Treasury is assisting municipalities that fall into financial distress as a result of diminishing own revenue. Now, in terms of the Constitution, we know that municipalities remain ultimately responsible for the finances that they are faced with. As such, a municipality's first approach is to reconsider the efficiency of expenditure, revenue, and whether there are any unnecessary services not part of the core mandate, and the relevancy of the organizational structuring to provide on its core mandate. And you and I know that in many cases, municipalities do have bloated organizational structures that drain the coffers of the municipality, as well as tap into the equitable share funding to service the wage bill. It is council's responsibility to revisit and streamline its chosen organizational structure, non-core services and related expenditure in these circumstances to facilitate and take responsibility for the municipality's ongoing sustainability. In terms of National Treasury Local Government Revenue Improvement Program, municipalities receive support towards strengthening the revenue value chains. And this is a huge area of concern for us. In the National Treasury's experience, a funded budget facilitates payment towards bulk supplies and other creditors. Municipalities are encouraged and educated on the ongoing basis on funded budgeting. Municipalities are educated and assisted with tariff setting and to present cost-reflective tariffs, or at least a phasing-in approach thereof. Selected municipalities' tariffs are also independently assessed towards providing focused support. Towards the completeness of revenue, base, the revenue enhancement municipalities are assisted to address the variances between the billing system and the valuation roles, and to ensure alignment between these two. As in many cases, we find that there are inconsistencies in these two pieces of basis for revenue. Municipalities are also assisted to develop proper policies and to facilitate revenue enhancement and to prevent seepage through the policies. The Municipal Revenue Enhancement Program, the Municipal Revenue Management Improvement Program has also been introduced to assist provincial treasuries as well as support to municipalities. And the support that has been provided is aligned to the 43 municipalities that have been identified to be in crisis. Municipalities also educated on revenue management best practices through master classes in each province, as well as on the 43 municipalities that have been identified to be in crisis. We've also introduced, or we will be introducing a transversal tender to take care of the smart prepaid solution for municipalities. Unfortunately, the costing for these prepaid solutions will have to be borne by municipalities ultimately. These are just some of our more obvious areas that we've been observing through our analysis of the budgets of municipalities. And in summary, yes, municipal finances are critically affected by load shedding. Sales of services are reduced. It reduces delivery on reliable mandated services. Tariffs have to be adjusted to accommodate shortfalls. Maintenance costs are increased. The funding of the budgets are effective. More unfunded budgets are presented with expenditure levels remaining constant. It reduces customer affordability. It reduces customer confidence, and ultimately economic development opportunities are lost, and it deprives investment for development, something that our country seeks so desperately. And consequently, number of municipalities in distress, as per the local government finances report, remain high. More municipalities are on the brink of being identified as in crisis, and this we're saying the distressed municipalities are more on the brink of being in crisis, and bankrupt and insolvent municipalities remain high. I thank you, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Sadesh. You're actually painting a very bleak picture, although you are, demonstrating that National Treasury is trying very hard to come up with proposals to circumvent these issues. But one element which also comes out very strongly is the issue of affordability, because consumers now are becoming more and more poor, and they are unable to afford electricity. And I guess that's where we don't really touch so much on household incomes and how this is affected by the inability to purchase electricity, which is also linked to other social consequences of this, because it also carries issues around, the nutritional insecurity, the cost of production, which is carried over to consumers, and also the opportunity costs for the informal economy, where they are so dependent on electricity supply in order for them to be productive. And I guess this issue now leads us to Dr. Tracy Ledger and Mahlatse Rampedi, who have conducted research extensively on electricity and poverty. And they've recently published a book which is titled Hungry for Electricity. Both of them, they are researchers at PARI, and Dr. Ledger is leading the Energy Society program. So without wasting any further time, Tracy and Mahlatse, let me hand over to you to talk to us specifically around these questions of energy and poverty and the social security that it carries through. Let me hand over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Thina. Good morning, everyone. I think I'd like to start with an Einstein quote of my own, which is the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. And I think I'm just going to sketch a little bit of background to our work, and then hand over to Mahlatse, who's going to share with you some of our main findings. Our work has focused for a long time on the fact that the electricity revenue model in local government is fundamentally unsustainable, and it is fundamentally anti-poor and fundamentally anti-development. So what load shedding has done is it hasn't created this problem, it simply made it worse. And the bottom line is that electricity is intended to be the single biggest source of revenue for local government's operations budget. And it's critical to remember that out of that operations budget, we're supposed to be paying for infrastructure maintenance and other critical issues like that. But what has happened is that South African households are more and more unable to pay for electricity. If we think about affordability of electricity, this is way beyond the reach of the average household. We need to remember that 25% of South African households, at some 4.5 million households, live below the food poverty line, which means that they don't have enough money in their total income to buy a nutritionally balanced basket of food. If they pay for electricity, that money comes out of their food budget. Our work has shown that probably 50 to 55% of South African households are sacrificing basic food expenditure to pay for electricity. And this has got incredibly negative implications for socio-economic development and is fundamentally undermining the national development plan. At the same time, electricity is critical to almost all economic activity. Data shows that a household that's got access to electricity and can afford that electricity is significantly more likely to start their own business. Our research, as Mahlatse will talk about now, has shown that people need electricity to start businesses, to run businesses, and to expand businesses. So the inability of people to afford electricity is a fundamental issue that's been there for a long time. Load shedding has simply made it worse. So we have this situation where the entire local government fiscal framework essentially depends on extracting money out of households that either simply don't have the money to pay for their municipal services or are sacrificing food expenditure to pay for their services and then cannot engage in significant economic activity because of their inability to access electricity. And I think it's important to note that South Africa's JP includes a line item that we need to rethink the role of electricity revenue in local government budgets, because the way in which the system is currently working is not benefiting anyone. And it's not just individual households that are losing out, but it is significantly undermining our ability to reach our national development goals. And the reality on the ground for households is really, really dire and awful. So that we're supposed to have a developmental local government, and a key part of that developmental agenda is to deliver the services that will enable people to improve their lives. But in fact, the opposite is happening, is that the quality of people's lives is being eroded because they cannot afford to pay for that service. But let me hand over to Mahlatse, who's going to share some of the more details of the work that we've been doing over the last year. And he in particular spent a lot of time in communities around the country documenting their struggles to access electricity. Mahlatse?
Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. My name is Mahlatse Rampedi. I'm a researcher here at PARI. Unfortunately and ironically, I'm going through load shedding. So it's going to be quite interesting to speak about it. So as Tracy mentioned earlier about our findings that, you know, electricity, we've worked on electricity for quite a while, and electricity is quite critical for societal and national development. You know, we have empirical evidence of the linkages between energy and development. So so the lack of electricity, as everybody knows, is pretty much a key contributor to poverty on the ground. You know, a lot of poor people, the poorest of the people in different communities, most of the problems around load shedding are transferred to them. It has, you know, exacerbated the closure of channels for development. It has impacted how people spend their time, their money. And as mentioned before with some of our colleagues, you know, that the quality of what they eat and their nutrition overall. Even, for example, amongst the people we worked with, living with electricity is quite expensive, you know, in the sense that people have to find alternatives to getting energy and to sustaining themselves. So, and again, energy is quite essential for our economic growth, as some of our colleagues concede. You know, it supports our broader national developmental goals. So one of the biggest findings we mentioned in our book is that access to electricity is quite key to reducing poverty. You know, we have empirical benefit. It lowers the risk of running businesses, as Tracy mentioned, for low-income households. It fosters employment. You know, food security. It increases incomes. Education as well is also you know, the access to education and the way people experience it is quite improved. And another thing that usually came up in much of the research is how having access to electricity has unburdened a lot of primary caregivers, particularly women in rural and urban low income areas. So affordability, this one is a big thing actually amongst most citizens and residents, because universal access cannot be realized when the electricity is too costly for people. This is one key factor that we try to work around and see exactly how just access to electricity has benefited most of the people. So, and which is quite problematic, this access. We have the Eskom and municipalities, that provide electricity at an inconsistent and often quite failing rate. And the free basic electricity, although it's not enough to run a household or to meaningfully combat energy poverty. So we have, on the other side, illegal connections, quite pervasive, very dangerous, not so sustainable, burdens the grid, and in some cases causes political conflict. But the other problem about these connections is that discourse on electricity has loved those who sort of like get energy in this way and try to alleviate their poverty by getting energy illegally. They've been disenfranchised, especially non-ratepayers and people on the periphery. They are practically do not have a seat in the conversation around energy. So one quote I can mention from one of our people is that the energy, the debate around energy is there, but it's quite an unfair one, and Eskom and the government view people who connect this energy, electricity illegally, not as normal people, but as criminals. Not only see this from a criminality perspective, but as thieves. This is why they come with the police. They don't view us as just poor people who want a better life, who want to work and to be progressive. So, speaking about energy from the ground is especially when there's lack of energy, when there's now load shedding, it's the most disenfranchised are pretty much pushed further into the periphery. So we've been doing some work, as you mentioned, over the years. I heard Mr. Mulaudzi there, or Dr. Mulaudzi speaking about alternatives to what do you call alternatives to some of the alternatives that the municipality has been pushing forward for people. Yeah, you're looking at sustainable energy in particular. I see a few municipalities that have actually tried to actually put. Just give me 1 second. So this is some of the pictures that I've been taking lately. Some of them are in the book just to show exactly how energy poverty is going on the ground. So this is some of the attempt by the municipality to put in a newer infrastructure to actually alleviate the electricity problem. So this is Timberlake, and a few of these panels, a few of these solar devices are put up throughout into the south. However, a lot of them, they have just been left unused. They have been left unused. Some are vandalized. Eventually. So some of the grids have never actually even worked, and now the infrastructure is further disintegrating. So other problems that we come across, you find people trying to fix, I suppose, their own infrastructure because they do not have access to or meaningful access to the municipality and how they can be helped doing this. So illegal connections have become very dangerous as well. If you look at Princess here, just give me a sec. So Princess, yeah, they've had like a lot of connections. The entire town. When you're walking, down the street, you can see overhead. There's cables for about maybe 1 kilometer overhead. This is one of the townships that pretty much nobody really ever visits or writes about. So so I mean, they in this particular township, I mean, getting alternative electricity now has been a means of sort of vandalizing and connecting to the nearby buildings, connecting to new developments around them. You know, so now, I mean, given that there's load shedding as well, now begs the question of exactly what these people, I mean, how deep are these problems going to be when basic access to that electricity is already problematic. So this is Waterworks, one of the townships that we visited as well. Electricity here has just being installed, and it worked for about maybe a year or so. So they literally went and connected to a railway station, some of the infrastructure. Since the cables in the railway station, they were all stolen, etc., etc. So people just, you know, found it in their way to sort of alleviate that there are problems with electricity and poverty through connecting to other failing infrastructures around them. So this is the railway station going down to the Lanseria side. Hopefully it has been rejuvenated because of the new rejuvenation of transportation, particularly around railways and new trains, etc. So now in this particular township, they would, they've connected by converging all of the cabling and everything into, I mean, from households into one long cable that goes about 1 kilometer. This is the exit of the township, where the cables go across the street, converging into one singular and all rolled up one lines that go up and go and connect directly. This is where you descend into the rail station. On the left, on the road, that's it, the road all the way to the township, going all the way to the Lanseria rail station to connect to electricity. So these are some of the basic connections that people use. So I'm speaking of energy. The entire work that we did. I mean, speaking of hungry for electricity. So this was what came out of our book. It's gonna be one of many, hopefully. It's part of the Energy Society program, you know, centered around just energy transition, particularly the links between just transition energy and poverty. You know, we've had testimonies from people in different townships with their struggles around electricity, etc. So, however, the overarching theme of that is that universal access is quite crucial to poverty reduction, and this is going to be an ongoing project. So now the questions going forward, particularly for the benefit of this webinar, is that how, at a local government, how has load shedding impacted energy poverty? Excuse me for that. And yes, and I mean, what alternatives are there for people who cannot already access electricity amid load shedding and reduce municipal capacity? And most crucially for me, particularly, is in what meaningful way can the disenfranchised be included in the energy debate, especially given that usually non-ratepayers, they connect illegally for some, you know, so they're quite invisible in the perspective of so many of like institutions, etc. So now, and finally, the impact of load shedding on the just energy transition in South Africa. That is those are just to end there. Yeah, so yeah, we can continue from there. Tracy, unless you have anything else to add that I missed. Thank you, everyone. Sorry, I couldn't do the video thing. I'm using my phone because there's no electricity and I have to use this other thing here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahlatse. Tracy, is there anything that you wish to add or conclude with?
No, I don't think so. I think once again, the message is that I don't think we should, although it's obviously critically important that we address the energy issues that are creating load shedding, I don't think we must lose sight of the fact that we have a fundamentally dysfunctional revenue model in local municipalities in respect of electricity that is deepening poverty, deepening inequality, and deepening the local government fiscal crisis. And we can keep going on the way we're going, but can assure you nothing's really going to change. We need a completely different way of conceptualizing how people are accessing electricity. We need to think about electricity the same way as we think about education. It's a critical enabler of socio-economic development. We would never in a developmental state have a system where people can only access education if they can hand over money that they don't have to access it, because we understand that even though the individual benefits, the whole of society benefits from access. We need to think about electricity in exactly the same way and understand that we are undermining our entire national development agenda by insisting that poor people have to pay for services they just don't have money for.
Thank you, Tracy. You've just left us with something critical to really think about, because, you know, looking at those pictures that Mahlatse has demonstrated through that presentation, it is sort of like a physical demonstration of the crisis that South Africa has been in, even previously, before we started having the kind of intensive load shedding. And it begs the question in terms of what is an alternative that is left for those communities, since now they have made illegal connections and now they are faced with load shedding. And therefore it means that it's back to square one, looking for other alternative sources of energy, which might contribute, or in fact, which might undermine, you know, the whole climate change agenda that we are talking about decarbonizing. Because if poor communities don't have electricity, it means that they will have to burn wood, they will have to use paraffin, which contributes to the higher emissions of carbon. So it's almost like, you know, a cycle where the South African government is trying to mitigate climate change, but on the other hand, because of the dire poor and economic, problems that we have in this country, it makes us go back to square one. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of our presentations, and I can see that there are a couple of questions that have been posed in the question and answer chat box. And I will start with a few of those questions. And there's also one question which I would also like to pose, particularly to Silas, when we're talking about alternative sources of energy. Now, Silas, if you are back online, because Silas had to step out to address a meeting for about 5 minutes. But what I would like to really hear from you is that, since you are now working closely with the local government sector in looking for alternative sources of energy and bringing in the IPPs to become players in this sector, you know, to what extent can all municipalities start to look at those alternative sources of energy? Because we know that with the legislative regulations that had been pronounced by the Department of Minerals and Energy, is that municipalities who have, you know, a clean debtors book with Eskom are the ones who are allowed to start looking for alternative sources of energy. And this begs the question of whether, you know, more than half of these 200 some odd municipalities in the country, which are bankrupt, and most of them owing money to Eskom, how are they going to benefit, you know, in seeking alternative sources of energy? And let me get into a second question that has been posed in the chat room. In the question and answer, is from Lindy Wendlela. She is actually asking, what is the responsibility of government, especially the National Treasury, including COCTA and the economic cluster, when so many communities cannot afford electricity? And this obviously undermines the municipal finances and ultimately the country's developmental goals, as previously mentioned by Tracy and Mahlatse. And another question is from Lungelwa Jimana. She is saying that, I have a question as to why doesn't Eskom distribute electricity on its own in suburbs and townships, the same as they are doing in rural areas? Because I believe people in townships, they are doing illegal connections because they cannot afford to buy. And I strongly believe it's one of the things that makes load shedding to be on the rise. And a third question, this is coming from, in fact, it's a comment from Les. Les is saying that we need solutions and have to stick to private sector unfunded solutions for municipalities involving utility scale batteries and PV. it ticks most of the boxes of problems mentioned here, MMs and DMs. You're saying that please get in touch with me and leaving an email and a contact number. So in other words, Les is offering other solutions to this crisis. And then lastly, from Stephen Kanan, what changes do you, Mahlatse and Tracy, think are needed for free basic services policy framework in order to make the solution work for poorer residents? So let me give you an opportunity to answer those questions. If Silas is on the line, maybe you can start, but if you're not back online, Sadesh, maybe you can start, and then Tracy and Mahlatse. Thanks.
Hi, Dr. Nzo.
Yes, Sadesh, I think Silas is not back online. You can go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, maybe Silas can go first and I'll join after that.
No, Sadesh, Silas is not back online, so you can go ahead.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm not going to respond to Stephen Kenyon's, and I'm hoping that Tracy and Dr. Silas will perhaps help us with that. Stephen Kenyon and myself come from the same institute. so perhaps we're looking for the same answer. But I'm just going to touch on some of the questions that has been posed. And here again, I mean, there's been questions posed around the equitable share formula and the effectiveness of the equitable share formula to address the crisis that we faced with. And here, I think, as much as the formula is being refined, it's still the municipality is responsible to collect what's due to them, and we find that prior to the crisis of load shedding, municipalities have not been collecting what was due. So this has perpetuated over the years, and here I think that should municipalities, strengthen the revenue collection, the revenue value chain efficiencies, they'll be able to collect on what's due and assist with the revenue that's unfortunately not available right now. Government doesn't have additional funding to assist municipalities in this regard, and the pot is only so big. With other pressures on the funds, is difficult for government to keep putting towards a crisis that's perhaps on the municipal side is self-inflicted by not collecting what's due to them. I didn't hear the other questions, Dr. Nzo, can you repeat it? And I'll perhaps try and touch on it.
It was related to the role that the National Treasury, SALGA, and also other economic cluster in terms of what kind of responsibility do you have to actually mitigate the whole problem that we're faced with, where communities cannot afford electricity, especially poorer communities, which also undermines the municipal finances and ultimately the country's development goals. But I think you have touched on it by actually telling us that, there are no extra resources there. We have to do with what we have. But at the same time, it really doesn't resolve, Sadesh, the issue of the fiscal framework and the division of revenue that is so inefficient for local government. So, yeah.
Yes, Dr. Nzo, if I can come in there, we could argue this point the whole day. The point that you're raising, that local government's share of the fiscus is insufficient. We could argue the opposite and say that there's 290 billion owed to municipalities for services. Should municipalities collect at least 1/3 of that, their problems may be partly resolved. And then the payments to the creditors, the bulk and other creditors may be resolved as well. So from where I'm sitting, and I'm responsible for revenue management in municipalities, I am I can see evidence that municipalities are not doing enough to collect what is due to them. So like I said, we could argue this point over and over. We think that local government is sufficiently funded. If you take the losses that municipalities are incurring through dilapidating and infrastructure, and you add all of that up, you'll find that municipalities do have sufficient funding, and there's too much seepages in the operations of municipalities. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Silas, are you back online? Okay, Silas is not back online. Tracy, let me bring you in.
Thanks, Thina. Yeah, so I think there are a couple of things that can be done to improve access to basic services for poor households straight away. Within the current fiscal envelope, there are two options. So the first thing is that part of the equitable share to local municipalities includes a package of free basic services worth almost 600 Rand a month, which is a considerable amount of money for a food insecure and a poor household that is intended to benefit some 10.9 million households. Only 2.5 million households actually receive any of those benefits. And this represents about 30 billion Rand that is essentially an extra tax that is imposed on the poorest households in South Africa. It's having a considerable impact on poverty. And this is because of the way in which municipalities have structured their indigent registers. There's a strong incentive for municipalities to keep households off the indigent register, because if they don't use the money that they get in the equitable share for the free basic services, it can go into general revenue. Everybody's under financial pressure. So on the one hand, I understand that municipalities are taking this funding because they're under financial pressure, but it is not for the poorest, most desperate households in South Africa to save the local government financial crisis. So the first thing is that all of the 10.9 million households that are funded in the budget to receive free basic services must receive those services. And the biggest culprits in this respect are the big metros, not smaller or secondary municipalities, with obviously the exception of the most dysfunctional municipalities. That's the first thing. That is going to put 30 billion Rand into the pockets of the poorest households in South Africa. It needs to be enforced. Someone in national has to take responsibility for overseeing that. In terms of the free basic electricity, I would agree that there actually is scope to increase the allocation of the free basic electricity. If we increased free basic electricity to 100 kilowatt hours per month, which actually is also in the JP, that obviously has got a fiscal implication. But we need to remember two things. The first thing is that Eskom regularly receives a bailout from the state to balance their balance sheets. Last year it was some 21 billion Rand. We also need to remember that about 2/3 of poor households, that is about 2/3 of the households that would receive this free basic electricity increase, are direct prepaid customers of Eskom. So essentially what we would be doing is we'd be taking the bailout money that would be going to Eskom, giving it to Eskom, but simply, I don't know if the appropriate word is laundering it, through poor households, and in that way getting a double benefit from the cash, because that money would end up at Eskom anyway and address their ability to increase revenue. So I think that there is room to be innovative within the current fiscal framework, and I think that there is, increasing the free basic electricity to 100 kilowatt hours per month would probably cost about 12 billion Rand a year, which is only about half of what the state bails out to Eskom. It's much more efficient to increase end user subsidies to Eskom rather than to prevent Eskom from implementing its price increase, because this kind of regulatory certainty is absolutely essential to Eskom keeping its credit rating. So it is much more efficient for the state to give end user subsidies to households to buy electricity from Eskom than simply to say we can't implement the price increase, but we're still going to give the money to Eskom anyway. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a very important one, the free basic electricity, Tracy. And it just came into my mind that also when it comes to water provision, there is this 6 kiloliters of water that's supposed to be even supplied to poor households, and yet we never really get any audited outcomes in terms of the extent to which that these communities, these households are actually getting what is due to them with that free basic electricity, which is obviously not enough as well, yeah.
There are about 7.5 million households that don't get their, no, it's a bit less if you can't consider the communal standpipes. There's still about 6 million households that should be getting free basic water that are not. And in many cases, households are spending as much money on paying for water as they are for electricity because they're not getting their free basic water.
All right. In the question and answer chat room, I can see that there's a lot of debates happening there where actually people are, for example, like Jeets is asking if, is there a people-centered approach to the delivery of electricity? And another comment here, which has been made by Charlie Naidu, is actually asking, how is local government supposed to collect when more than 55% of communities live below the poverty line? It doesn't make sense. So these questions keep on coming up, this kind of citizen, centric approach to being a developmental state in providing essential services like electricity. And again, there's another comment that has come through as well from Albert, who's saying that a very radical solution then that may not be legal in the current legal framework is to start giving grants to Eskom and the municipalities to electrification. The integrated national electrification grant is about 2 billion per year. The problem with installing infrastructure to connect people that cannot pay for services just means that municipalities cannot raise enough revenue to maintain the infrastructure. So perhaps a direct grant to supply electricity directly to households in the form of renewables might be an alternative. One of the biggest problems is while solar energy is free in theory, some maintenance will be required, and who will pay the cost? And I think, Silas, if you're back in the line, we definitely need you to come in to help us answer these questions about renewables. Because another question that was also posed is that, is there a study that actually shows how much money will municipalities have to spend, how much resources will have to be spent in actually getting alternative energy? And maybe another question related to that is that, does the current, infrastructure, Silas mentioned that our network infrastructure is old, it cannot handle the pressures. Does the alternative infrastructure, serve the kind of alternative sources of energy that we use that need to be brought into the grid? So it's taking us back to that discussion about alternative sources of energy. Silas, are you back in the line? Let's have a conversation on alternative sources of energy. Yeah. Silas, I can see you are unmuted. Silas? Okay, anybody would like to comment on these issues related to state capacity and renewable energy for local government? Sadesh, maybe your comments on it, looking at it from a financial perspective.
Thanks, Dr.
Thina. Oh, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Oh, Silas is back. All right, let's give Silas an opportunity. Silas, you can go ahead.
Sorry, Thina, that was me earlier.
Okay, all right.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. No, I was looking at what's the chat screen? At Jeef's comment about there being a people-centered approach. That is the problem that we have, actually, that there isn't really a bit of a, I mean, this quite
Mahlatse, we have lost you there.
Can you? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes, and I'm just saying that, like, I mean, that the free basic energy electricity policy, I mean, although it does, it does acknowledge that, you know, electricity has to be increased, you know, but you know, I mean, electricity, yes, free basic electricity does not really cover much of the household needs. So like that people-centered approach, it does not really exist that much. So, I mean, although it does, you know, what do you call, address these issues, it does not propose any sort of goal of exactly how much, you know, households, how much electricity they should be using to sort of give right to definite development in their communities. So it is just there, and this is one of the studies that is quite needed, which is something that we would like to actually do to sort of advocate towards the increase of free basic electricity. So I think that that's a crucial one, actually, a people-centered approach so that, you know, the electricity distribution could be something sustainable, something developmental, and something that actually makes sense to people.
Yeah, absolutely. Sadesh, you also wanted to come in as well. You can go ahead.
Yeah, no, Dr. Nzo, you raised the question about renewable energy. I'm not too acquainted with the nuts and bolts of it, so perhaps I'm not going to answer that. I'll share.
How about financing?
Yeah.
Is there any
I think
concept?
I think there's a lot of discussion taking place currently on how best to address this matter. You know, and from where we sit, we need to look at the most viable option when it comes to all of these options that's being posed. Yes, various and several options have been placed at National Treasury with regards to the crisis that we face. And I'm talking about the load shedding crisis and the ability to get Eskom up and running on its feet. But again, from where we sit, we need to be very, very particular on how we approach this. There are good options, but then again, from a finance point of view, it has to be viable for the entire country. As you know, and many of them who are on the group know that the finances of the country are very constrained. Tracy made a point about Eskom being bailed out. Yes, we need to understand what they're being bailed out for. So sometimes the background information is very important to make comments in the platform of this nature. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Okay, Tracy, maybe your comments about the infrastructure capabilities of municipality and this whole drive of renewable energy, decentralization of renewable energy.
I know that there is the sense that, the way kind of out of the problem is to give individual households access to their own solar systems. I don't know that this is really a viable option. If you look at the cost of the systems that is really required to give people access to sufficient electricity to improve their lives. A little solar system that does a couple of lights and things is not a sustainable solution. So I do think that utility scale solutions, incorporating end user subsidies at the end of the day are the most effective way of addressing these issues.
Yeah, and also there's another question online, which is coming from Gaina Paratza. She's actually saying that the electricity and energy crisis is a regional problem, looking at it from an African perspective. Do we have any, kind of like promising models or alternative that are coming from other regions where we could look at as South Africa for the long term? Any knowledge of such in the region? Any studies coming from the region? It's a pity that Silas is not online because he would have been one of the key people to give us, you know, a picture, since they are also working, you know, in collaboration with other Southern African local government associations in the region. Silas, are you back online? Still not back online. Okay. All right. Other comments as well. Also, just a question in that comment. The key is that the services must reach households, and are there municipalities here that can explain why does it not reach households? The funding modalities are secondary, but must address the blockages from the viewpoint of the citizens and the municipalities in order for these to be solved. That's also just another comment. And another comment is that affordable solutions for poor communities, particularly informal settlements and townships and rural areas, is what we need to be concentrating on. So again, it comes back to the issue of affordability as well in this whole crisis. And another comment that also has just come through from Albertus Jobert. One of the problems with free basic services, there is a difference between Stats SA and municipalities. Due to confidentiality provision of the census, is it possible to reconcile the differences? When I was employed at a municipality, I could prove that the municipal could prove the municipal figures. I am an accountant and not a statistician, but census would not be a sufficient audit evidence in terms of international standards of auditing. Okay, that's another argument there. Silas, are you back online? Because we need you to answer the many renewable energy questions of local government as alternative sources. So are you back online? Okay, seems as if like we have lost Dr. Mulaudzi there. Ladies and gentlemen, there aren't any more new questions that are coming through on the line chat, except for those comments that have been made by others who are concerned about the issues of affordability. So on that note, I would just like to give you each 5 minutes, if not 2 minutes, to just wrap up and maybe come up with some certain recommendations that you would put forward before we close the session. Let's start with you, Sadesh. Any closing lines and recommendations moving forward on how we can tackle this issue?
Yes, thanks, Dr. Nzo. It's a pity Dr. Silas is not with us. His input would have been valuable. Nevertheless, there's quite a few comments and questions being raised around the equitable share and the model that's being imposed by government. There's questions around the Stats SA information that's being used in these formulas to generate the subsidy that each municipality receives. And perhaps there is an opportunity, and it has been always open. Should there be an opportunity for a municipality to prove, other than the census, that the numbers are incorrect, we'd like to perhaps engage on that. I'm sure Dr. Pakis that deals with this at National Treasury will be most interested in hearing how these numbers can be generated other than the census. It has to be a very formal kind of research that's required to prove otherwise. Other than that, Dr. Nzo, I think the crisis that we are facing also provides with opportunities. Like I've started off with the quote by Albert Einstein, and I think we need to tap on those opportunities right now. From where we're sitting, those that can afford to put solar panels and PVs on the rooftops, and perhaps push back into the grid. But we need to have that bi-directional meters that can provide that. I mean, what Cape Town is doing is very, very progressive. But again, there has to be some storage facility available to capture this energy for providing to indigents that may need this. So in that way, you're not drawing on the Eskom demand to provide the free basics that's required. So these are some of the opportunities that may exist, and we need to explore these in a bigger way. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that contribution, Sadesh. Tracy, any closure and recommendations?
Just one point. I think we've spoken quite clearly about our recommendations in terms of the free basic electricity and the free basic services. But just to pick up on Sadesh's point about alternative ways of getting electricity into the grid. Yes, there is huge potential for this, but in order for that to be realized, we need to have the kind of municipal distribution grids that are able to take in and manage large amounts of renewable energy from diversified sources at unpredictable times of the day. There's a considerable amount of grid planning and grid upgrading that needs to be done. And for the majority of municipalities and a lot of the metros, and I live in Joburg, the funding is just not available to do that. City of Joburg, City Power says it has a 26 billion rand infrastructure maintenance backlog in its electricity infrastructure. It has no funds whatsoever to start conceptualizing the kind of grid changes that we need, bidirectional meters, time of day management, battery storage linked to mini substations, etc., etc. And the problem is that all of that money to fund that is supposed to be coming from revenue collection from exactly the households that cannot afford to pay their electricity bills. So somehow we've got to break this vicious cycle that we are trapped in, because otherwise we are not going to make any progress at all, and we're going to lose a significant opportunity in the interim. Thanks.
Thanks, Tracy. Your last point was actually one of the points that I wanted Silas to also talk to us about the capabilities of municipalities, moving into alternative sources of energy when it comes to generation and distribution. So I will definitely throw those questions to him as well, so that we can make sure that, he gives us a little bit of an indicator in terms of what is SALGA thinking about this kind of situation that we're faced with. And then lastly, Mahlatse, you are the one who deals with communities, face to face when you do your field work. I mean, maybe you could actually make your last point and recommendation that is stemming from the kind of work that you have dealt with within the direct experiences you've had in the field.
Thank you, host. So a few of my comments and closing remarks have actually been made, but I'd like to just go back to having a bit of a good study on assessments on household need in terms of free basic electricity. I mean, that is something that is quite crucial in driving policy towards something that is sustainable and doable. Also, just to, I still stick to my other point about having to find meaningful ways of including disenfranchised people in the discourse about energy, especially things that affect them. This hasn't really been, the discussion itself hasn't really been quite inclusive, and municipalities and the police, City Power and other people, they've quite been punitive, especially around people who access electricity illegally, The other point on a structural level, would be aligning planning around your renewable energy with hosting municipalities. With our work on public participation, you find that there's a bit of disengagement between some of the new developments around alternative and renewable energy, and municipalities are not quite involved. So, what role do they play in those? In those particular circumstances, and how has planning, how have they been involved in terms of planning, distribution, even getting income from some of these alternative measures? So far, I mean, looking at some of the places that we've been in the country, there's a bit of a nice drive towards renewable energy, but the disengagement between the people that are hosting these developments and the people providing such electricity is quite problematic as it stands.
Thanks, Mahlatse. Yeah, it talks to the way in which the IPP program, the Independent Power Producer Program, has been, put together by national government, particularly your infrastructure, your national treasury, and the presidency, when it comes to issues of, getting alternative sources of energy, but coming from host municipalities who do not even have access to this energy and have been disengaged in this path. So thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we've lost Silas, unfortunately, but I will definitely post his questions so that we can be able to write a little small snippet of what the outcomes would be coming from this discussion that we have. And you will be able to get some of those responses through that piece that we will post up in PARI. But thank you so much for participating in this webinar and for coming through. We hope that some of your questions were answered, and those that have not been answered, we need to get more engagements going that really focuses on local government and the energy crisis in South Africa. So on that note, my panelists, thank you for making time to be with us, and I hope you will enjoy your day. Thanks a lot. This is the end of it.